The sledgehammer went through the kitchen wall like it was made of paper. But what poured out wasn't plaster dust, it was hair. Human hair, decades old, cascading onto my work boots in brittle waves that smelled of old perfume and something worse. I'd been renovating houses for 15 years, but nothing had prepared me for what we found inside the walls of 1428 Sycamore Street. My name is Miguel Reyes, and I should have listened when the previous contractor quit. That house doesn't want to be changed, he'd told me, handing over his keys with shaking hands. Every time you fix something, it breaks something else. Every wall you open shows you things that shouldn't be there. I'd laughed it off. Old houses always had quirks. But as I stood there, staring at the hair spilling from the wall cavity like a grotesque waterfall, I understood his fear. "Boss, you need to see this," called Dimitri, my demolition guy, from the living room. His voice had that edge that meant he'd found something bad. Behind the 1950s wood paneling, the original walls weren't just lath and plaster. They were newspapers. Thousands of them, layered and glued and pressed together. All from 1952, all showing the same date, March 15th. But what made my skin crawl were the headlines. They started normal, local woman missing. Hurry search continues for Margaret Chen. Then they changed, evolved, became something else. Margaret Chen found in walls. Woman lives between spaces. She watches through the paint. The last one, pressed against what should have been a support beam, simply read, "I'm still here." We should have left then, should have packed up our tools and walked away. But the owner, Mrs. Garrison, was paying triple rate for a rush job, and I had a crew to feed, so we kept working, even as the house began to show its true nature. Day 2, we found the first room that shouldn't exist. Tommy was measuring for new electrical when his tape measure went too far into the wall, 15 feet where there should have been only 6 inches. He'd punched a hole to investigate and found empty space, a narrow corridor running between the walls, just wide enough for someone thin to squeeze through. The smell that came from that space was indescribable, not rot. Exactly. But the scent of habitation, sweat and breath and human presence, concentrated over decades. We shined lights inside and saw scratch marks on the inner walls. Thousands of them, like tally marks or a countdown. Some formed words, "Let me out." Others were just grooves worn deep by fingernails. But the worst part was the photographs. Polaroids, taped to the inside of the walls, showing the interior of the house from impossible angles. Pictures taken from inside closets, from under beds, from within the walls themselves, all showing people living their normal lives, unaware they were being watched. The dates on the photos spanned 40 years. Mrs. Garrison identified some of the people, previous owners, their children, guests who'd stayed overnight. All had reported feeling watched. Several had moved out suddenly, leaving belongings behind. On day 3, the house began to fight back. Tools would disappear and reappear in sealed walls. Fresh sawdust would form patterns on the floor. Always the same woman's face, always screaming. The new drywall we installed would bulge overnight, as if something was pushing from behind. Dimitri quit when we found the bones. Not a full skeleton, just fingers, scattered throughout the walls like hidden treasures. Each one wrapped in 1952 newspaper. Each one with a small note. "She took this for watching. This for listening. This for knowing." I wanted to call the police, but Mrs. Garrison begged me not to. "Just finish the renovation," she pleaded. "Cover it all up. Make it normal. I'll pay whatever you want." But houses have memories. And this one remembered Margaret Chen. The breakthrough came when I actually read the newspapers. Margaret hadn't disappeared. She'd been sealed inside the walls by her husband when he caught her spying on neighbors through holes she'd drilled. The construction crew he'd hired thought they were just renovating. They'd buried her alive in her own hiding places. That night, working alone to finish the job, I heard her. Not ghost sounds, real sounds. Breathing. Movement. The scratch of fingernails on wood. She was still in there. Somehow. Still alive in the spaces between rooms. Living in the gaps. Feeding on. What? I didn't want to know. I found her main nest in the attic wall, a space carved out over decades, filled with stolen food, collected rainwater, and journals. Hundreds of journals, documenting every family who'd lived in the house. She'd survived by taking just enough to not be noticed, living like a parasite in her own home. The latest entry was from yesterday. New walls going up. He's trapping me again, but I know what to do now. I know how to make them see. I ran, left my tools, my truck, everything. But not before I saw her. Just a glimpse through a gap in the drywall. An old woman, impossibly old, pressed flat between the walls, her body molded by decades of compression. She smiled at me with too many teeth and whispered, "Thank you for opening the ways." The next day, Mrs. Garrison called. Hysterical. The renovations had reversed overnight. All the new walls were gone, replaced by dozens of human-sized holes, and in each hole, breathing spaces, waiting spaces. The house sold a month later to developers who demolished it. But sometimes, I drive by the empty lot and see her outline in the grass where the walls used to be. Still watching, still waiting. Because you can tear down a house, but you can't tear down the spaces between, and Margaret Chen had become the space itself, the gap between what we see and what sees us. They're building new houses there now, modern ones, with thick insulation and soundproofing, perfect for living between the walls. When we pulled down the bathroom tiles, we found another bathroom. Complete, functional, but 40 years out of date, trapped between the walls like a preserved museum display. The water in the toilet was still clear. The medicine cabinet held prescriptions dated 1983, and in the mirror, written in lipstick that hadn't dried in 4 decades, were the words, "They made me choose." I chose wrong. I'm Janet Wu, and I specialize in historic home restoration. The Blackwood house was supposed to be my masterpiece, a 1920s craftsman being returned to its original glory. But original glory, I learned, is sometimes better left buried. The impossible bathroom was just the beginning. As we stripped away decades of renovations, we found that every update hid something underneath. Not just old fixtures or outdated wallpaper, but entire rooms, sealed spaces, places that had been walled off and forgotten, each containing moments frozen in time. In the master bedroom, behind 1990s drywall, we found a nursery. The crib still had blankets, waiting for a baby that never came home. The mobile hung motionless until we entered, then began to spin on its own, playing a music box melody that made my teeth ache. The walls were covered in ultrasound images, hundreds of them, showing the same baby from impossible angles, some that could only have been taken from inside the womb. My foreman, Carlos, wanted to quit right then, but I was fascinated. Each hidden room told a story, revealed a choice. The house wasn't just renovated over the years, it was layered, like sediment, each trauma adding another secret space. The kitchen was the worst. We found 3 kitchens, nested inside each other like Russian dolls. The newest from 2010, bright and modern. Beneath it, a country kitchen from 1987. And beneath that, the original 1920s kitchen, where we found the first body. She sat at the breakfast table, perfectly preserved, a cup of coffee still steaming in front of her. Impossible. But there it was, hot coffee in a mummified hand. The newspaper beside her was from 1954, the crossword half finished. But the answers she'd filled in weren't words. They were dates, future dates. Dates when the house had been renovated. The last date was tomorrow. We called the police, but by the time they arrived, the body was gone. Only the coffee remained, still steaming, still impossible. The officer looked at us like we were crazy, but I had photos. Photos that showed empty chairs when I looked at them later. That's when I understood. The house didn't just preserve spaces, it preserved choices. Moments when lives fork, captured and held in architectural amber. Each renovation was an attempt to escape a decision, to wall off a path not taken. I found the architect's plans in the basement wall. Not the original plans, but plans that showed every hidden space, every sealed room, Plans dated next week. Plans signed with my name. In my handwriting, showing renovations I hadn't designed yet. The plans revealed the pattern. Every 30 years, someone would try to renovate the house back to its original state. And every time, they'd uncover the previous attempts, the failed restorations, the people who'd gotten trapped between what was and what should be. The basement was honeycombed with spaces, crawl spaces that led to other crawl spaces, a maze between the foundations. In one, I found filing cabinets filled with contracts, renovation contracts, all for this house, dating back a century, all signed by different people, all in my handwriting. Carlos quit when we found his body. Not dead, working. We opened a wall in the guest bedroom, and there he was, installing plumbing, wearing clothes from the 1960s. He didn't see us, couldn't see us. He was locked in his loop, renovating a room that had already been renovated 5 times over. The living Carlos screamed and ran. I stayed and watched his past self work, noticed how his movements synced with the scratching we'd been hearing in the walls. Every sound we'd attributed to rats or settling was actually the echo of previous renovations, all happening simultaneously in the spaces between. The house wanted to be everything it had ever been, all at once. Every update, every change, existed simultaneously. Walk through a doorway, and you might step into any decade. Open a closet, find yourself in a room that had been demolished 30 years ago. I tried to leave, but my car wouldn't start. My phone had no signal. The house had decided I was part of it now. Another renovation in progress. I went back inside and found the contracts on the kitchen table. Future contracts, for work I hadn't agreed to yet, but the signatures looked so much like mine. The final revelation came in the attic. I found myself an older version, grayed and weathered. Working on plans, she looked up when I entered, smiled sadly. "You're early," she said. "Usually takes another week before we meet ourselves." She explained what I'd already begun to understand. The house collected renovators like it collected renovations. We became part of its structure, human supports between the walls of time. Every person who'd tried to restore the house was still here, working in their own timeline, their own layer. "But I fixed it," she said, holding up new plans. "Found a way to collapse the layers, compress all the timelines into one. The house will finally be what it's supposed to be." "What happens to us?" I asked. She smiled wider, and I noticed her teeth were made of different materials: wood, plaster, copper pipe. "We become load-bearing." I ran, made it to the property line before the house pulled me back. Not physically, temporally. I found myself in my car, driving to the house for the first time, about to start the renovation. The loop had closed. Now I work. I renovate. I find the hidden spaces and the bodies and the impossible rooms. Sometimes I meet other versions of myself, earlier or later in the cycle. We nod, understanding. The house needs constant maintenance, after all, and someone has to do the work. But I've hidden this account in the walls, along with a warning. If you find this during your renovation, run. Don't look for the hidden rooms. Don't trace the pattern. And whatever you do, don't sign the contracts you'll find on the kitchen table. They're already filled out with your name. The structural engineer was adamant. This wall can't come down. It's load-bearing. But when we drilled the inspection hole, we didn't find support beams. We found arms. Human arms, calcified and fused with the timber, running the entire length of the house. They were still warm. I'm David Kim, and I bought 47 Ashwood Drive to flip. Quick renovation, quick profit. I had 3 months to transform a century-old colonial into modern luxury. But some foundations weren't meant to be exposed. The arms were just the beginning. Every wall we opened revealed more impossible anatomy. Ribs for rafters, spines for support columns, a vast skeletal system integrated into the house's structure. The bones were living, not alive. Exactly. But growing, spreading, incorporating our modern materials into their matrix. My contractor, Elena Vasquez, had seen everything in her 30 years of construction. But this made her pale. "David, she whispered, running her hand along a femur that served as a ceiling joist. These bones are fresh, still producing marrow. This house is organic. The previous owner's belongings were still in the attic, including renovation records dating back to 1891. Each generation had discovered the bones. Each had tried to remove them, and each had failed, because removing the bones meant removing the house itself. They were one and the same. The records spoke of the original builder, Silas Ashwood, an architect obsessed with creating living spaces. His journals detailed his experiments. A house should grow, he wrote, should adapt, should feed. He'd started with animal bones, creating a framework that could regenerate. But animal calcium proved too weak. He needed stronger materials, human materials. The journals ended with, "I will be the foundation. Build upon me." Elena found him in the basement. Not his body, him. Silas Ashwood's skeleton formed the main support structure, his skull centered under the living room, his arms spreading to hold the entire first floor. His bones had multiplied, divided like cells, creating a skeletal network reaching every corner. But the records revealed something worse. The bones weren't victims built into the house, they were builders who'd become the house. Every contractor who'd tried to renovate had been absorbed, their calcium recruited for structural support. Integration begins at first cut. One journal entry warned, "The house tastes you when you taste its dust." I'd been breathing renovation dust for a week. Elena noticed it first, the way my movements had started syncing with the house's settling. When pipes groaned, I groaned. When wood expanded in the heat, my joints popped in rhythm. The house and I were finding harmony. The crawlspace told the story. We found tool belts fused with floor joists, hammers growing from walls like metal fruit. A carpenter's pencil had taken root behind the water heater, sprouting measurement markings across the concrete. Everything that had tried to change the house became part of it instead. But it was the voices that convinced me. Whispers in the walls. Not ghostly, but structural. The integrated builders speaking through vibrations in their bones. They spoke of purpose, of peace, of the joy of permanent creation. "We need to leave," Elena decided. "Seal it up. Walk away." But the permits were filed, the loans taken, and the house had made me an offer. I found it written in sawdust on the bathroom floor. "Join us. Become eternal. Support something greater." The dust rearranged itself as I watched, showing me blueprints of what I could become. My bones reinforcing the foundation, my skills forever maintaining the structure. The integration was already beginning. My fingernails had hardened to match the oak floors. My blood ran copper when I cut myself on exposed wire. The calcium in my bones responded to the house's needs, strengthening where support was required. "The house needs us," I explained to Elena, showing her the calculations. "Look at the stress points. It's failing without fresh support. We could shore up the entire eastern wall." She ran. Smart woman, but she'd be back. The house had tasted her too, and renovation dust has a way of calling you home. I'm writing this as I transform, documenting the process for the next buyer. My left arm is already load-bearing, supporting the kitchen ceiling. It doesn't hurt. It feels like purpose, like coming home. My bones are denser now, threaded with copper wire and steel mesh. The house shows me visions of its future through our neural network of marrow and mineral. Not a flip, but a forever home. A living structure that heals its own wounds, maintains its own systems. We'll be its bones, its blood, its beating heart. If you're reading this, you've already started breathing the dust. You've already felt the house's pull. The question isn't whether you'll join us, it's when, and what part of the structure you'll become. The eastern wall still needs support. The attic beams are crying for reinforcement, and the foundation always needs more bones. Strong bones, skilled bones. Welcome home. Welcome to purpose. Welcome to permanence. The renovation never ends. It only incorporates. They're already filled out with your name.